Why don't I see, why don't I see the live thing on oh, you clicked it here. Okay, now I see it. Okay, then let me just tweet it out and also Blue Sky it out, and we can start.
Is Blue Sky still a thing?
I don't
Yes.
know. Look, I'm
Yeah, it's
getting
definitely active on
followers.
my end.
I'm getting followers. I
It's
ramped
definitely
up.
the anti-Musk crowd, but anti-Trump, anti-Musk more than anything. But
I don't know. I ramped up fairly quickly, and then it kind of stabled out, kind of. So I don't know. It's hard. I can't say if it's picking up steam or isn't.
I haven't seen anybody mention it other than just now in weeks. Like some people still politically have it in there, like not that they added it to their social media, but they replaced X in their social media to let
right.
you know, Like I
And
don't see anybody. Well, aside from you, I don't think anybody's doing both, and I don't see it picking up any steam.
Tal Liran is doing both.
Oh
I know
well,
some tech people that are spending all their time over there now.
Um, all it does is it doubles the effort for me. And the other
Yeah, exactly.
question is that I don't know if I'm when I count my followers, that very kind of egotistical thing, whether I should sum them both up.
It sounds like a product to me.
Yeah,
We're onto
exactly.
something.
Yeah, product with a very small market size. Anyway, let's start. So I'll do the intros. I'm the host today.
Yep, you
Okay,
got it.
I'll go for it. Okay, three, two, one. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another exciting episode of JavaScript Jabber. Today on our panel, we've got AJ O'Neill. How, AJ?
yo yo yo, coming at you live from the shed,
The purple room.
The
the purple room.
And Steve Edwards.
Yo, coming at you from as always, cool and cloudy Portland this time of year.
Oh, wow. Here in Tel Aviv, it's effectively summer, really.
Yes.
So we've got two great guests with us this week. We've got Ariel Schulman and we've got Liran Tal. Say hi to our listeners, please.
Hey,
Hi.
how's everybody going? Live from Tel Aviv, which is again summer here now.
Oh, I'm so jealous.
Yeah,
You
it's
should be.
We got
Or
a
you shouldn't
tease
be.
of like two really warm. We got a tease of two really warm days last week during the kids' spring break. Then it went back to the cool and rainy, which it's great for skiing and snow up on the mountain, but not so much for everybody else.
We had 2 rainy days
The whole
like
last
year.
year.
yeah, this year we hardly had any winter really. It was mostly summer all year long this year. Kind of springish.
It's just the best part of global warming when the winter is warm. Let's enjoy it.
Yeah. So putting the weather aside, uh, we are here to talk about TypeScript, I guess, in the
Oh
context
no.
of. Oh no.
Oh no. Did we already start?
Already, we're already gonna start fighting.
Yeah, TypeScript, but I guess in general or in the context of security,
Maybe both.
maybe both. So I think like everybody knows what TypeScript is, and from what I've been experiencing and seeing, everybody is more or less using TypeScript. I'm hard pressed to think about projects that don't use TypeScript unless they're really legacy projects. Any new project seems to be written in TypeScript. Does anybody disagree with this statement?
Absolutely standard.
At least in the enterprise space.
Even not in the enterprise space, I would say that even small projects tend to start with TypeScript now for the sake of developer experience.
Well, for the sake of AI, because you use an AI tool to generate your code and it generates it in TypeScript.
I think before that though, like
Yeah.
you had like even starter projects, like the default for like Astro, if you wanted a blog, would be like defaulting to TypeScript and things like that. So you'd pick a framework or some library, and like it would default you to TypeScript. And I think it would be, if you weren't doing TypeScript before, you'd like have to mess around with it to figure out how to like do not do TypeScript here, which maybe I know because I'm not naturally a TypeScript dev. But yeah, I also do agree. Like the TypeScript has kind of like taken over the system, and I think that's okay.
Ariel, by the way, just said that you switched audio devices for some reason.
I will fix it. Do you hear me? Well,
Yeah, but not.
Differently than before, yeah.
Yeah, it seems it's not coming through your microphone now. Anyway, probably the only scenario where I'm probably unlikely to use TypeScript would be if I'm doing something like a lead code interview.
Hmm.
And then in that type of a situation, I'd probably just
Use
default to
pseudocode, which is JavaScript.
essentially, yeah. Like you're going for speed
Yeah.
rather than for type safety.
I mean,
in that.
I can tell you why some of us maintainers hate the TypeScript part, which is for debugging, which was a long time pain for debugging like currently installed libraries. Like they're already like went through like the build phase, and they're like transpiled, and it's a mess debugging it. So that was something that was like, I mean, it's still kind of painful. But as a maintainer or as a dev who have to maintain within the Node modules package folder, you'd kind of like get lost and really want to rip all your hair out just because of it.
even though now everything changes.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think we're on a better trajectory now.
Ariel, we're still not on your microphone though.
And I think I need to log out and log back in. to
It's
get
the
back in.
JavaScript microphone.
You see, it's TypeScript bug. I'm gonna log out and log back in.
No problem. We'll be waiting for you. So yeah, I guess that's true. Uh, um, in the sense that whenever you like, I think we had Gil Tayal on the show like a long time ago, speaking about that very fact, about why he actually used to prefer JSDoc over
Hmm.
over
Yeah.
using TypeScript, um, uh, because he wanted to avoid the transpilation on the node side. His argument was that on the browser side, you're going to have transpilation anyway because of the bundling, because of JSX. So you might as well do TypeScript as well. But on the node side, where you could have just run the code as you wrote it, transpiling never adds value in that sense. And I totally agree with that.
Well, I don't know if you remember the whole big stink that Svelte basically did that exact same thing, where they've had a whole big announcement about we're getting rid of TypeScript, and what they started doing was JS Docs. And we talked to Rich Harris about that.
I think we can maybe draw the line, because JS Docs is still TypeScript, okay? There's TypeScript as a language, as a developer tool, and there's TypeScript as the transpiler. And you can enjoy TypeScript on your IDE even without transpiling, which is what JS Docs does. You're still writing TypeScript.
They are fundamentally different languages. JavaScript has a type system. It has a finite set of types, and there's things that you can and cannot do with those types. TypeScript, as of version 5, has become much better at dealing with JavaScript types. But TypeScript was designed to deal with C# types and to apply them to a browser. And so the pattern of code that you get with TypeScript versus JavaScript is radically and wildly different. You cannot easily write simple programs in TypeScript, certainly not with AI. But you can write simple programs in JavaScript, because JavaScript does not require complex type hierarchies, and JavaScript's type system is not Turing complete.
But wouldn't you say that large systems have large type hierarchies and require applications context?
Why would they? Why would you need to have large type hierarchies? That's the design flaw. That's not something inherent of the system. I mean, look at Go.
I think the lodge type hierarchies were an attribute of TypeScript in the early days, where indeed the language was kind of directing you toward building class hierarchies. All the examples, at least, were written that way. But I think people have not been writing TypeScript in this way for a while now. Most of the TypeScript code that I'm seeing can be thought of as JavaScript with static types. People are not building these huge collections of classes and then implementing interfaces and building TypeScript that way. I'm just not seeing it. Now, it might be because of React, because React went with hooks rather than with classes, or it might be that people just discovered that they could use TypeScript in a more JavaScripty sort of a way. I don't know. Maybe it's a combination of both, but that's the reality that I'm seeing.
I think there are also like there are many ways to use TypeScript. Yeah, you can take it in the very C#, like old school OOP way, but you can also use TypeScript as just a contract maker, just to define a contract that a function expects some contract as an input and expects to return some other type as an output, which is like defining contracts. And you can also use TypeScript in a higher level, which is to create an applications context. So if I have a function that accepts a name and an ID, and another function that accepts an object with a name and an ID, I can say that both functions accept a type of person. And by doing this, I created a context between these two functions. And I think that is kind of what's big about TypeScript. And do you guys know how TypeScript, like, how did it start? How did Anders start it?
I will let you talk about that. And by the way, there's a documentary about that. But before that, I do have to mention that these days in Node, we do have a built-in support for type stripping, which effectively just erases the types out. So that means that we can now use TypeScript files without transpilation with Node. We don't have to use JSDoc for that purpose anymore.
It's transpiled internally, like it is still transpiled. It uses an SWC plugin, like it just transpiles it internally inside Node. The code is transpiled.
Obviously, because at the end of the day, Node is using V8, which is a JavaScript engine. It's not a TypeScript engine.
Exactly.
So it needs, but it still means, first of all, the transpilation is basically just erasing the types. It replaces the type declarations with white spaces, and the as I said, the interesting or the useful aspect of it is that you can use the same source files. You don't need to go through a transpilation step before loading the files into Node. What you used to need something like TS Node for in the past, you can just do it with Node itself now. And obviously, you can do the same things with Bun and Dino. So it means that you don't need the source maps to be able to single step to the files anymore. You can just use those files as is, the same way that you would with let's say JSDoc. I'm just putting that out there. But now, going back to your point about that history of TypeScript that you were alluding to.
Just because for the haters, so the reason why TypeScript was even a thing, Anders was supposed to be joining the VS Code team, that they were developing VS Code in JavaScript. And the moment he joined the team and joined the effort, the first thing he suffered from was it's impossible to really refactor without a context. And he was like, guys, we have a much bigger problem here. And that's kind of how we started off building TypeScript in order to help developers develop, and out of his own pain as a developer. So like these days, it is a human tendency when we have something and when we have a pain, so to be focusing on the pain. But there are a lot of things that we do get a lot of value from TypeScript, and there are trends, it's true, but I do think that there is a reason why this is an industry standard.
I think the bottom line, I think, is that to a great extent, from what I'm seeing, but I'm the sample size is relatively large, is that TypeScript won. I'm seriously not seeing any significant new projects being started in JavaScript. None. It's not like one or two or here or there. Literally none. Every new project that I'm seeing is being started in TypeScript.
That's great. Even more of a case to talk about the security aspects of it.
Okay, then do we want to switch to talk about that? By the way, I didn't introduce you to, but because I forgot. But I think you both of you are coming kind of from the security space, right?
Are we,
Or
I,
Ariel?
or not?
No,
I'm
Ariel.
not from the security space.
Okay, then correct. Then please correct me. What space are you coming from?
I'm a full stack developer. TypeScript is my bread and butter. So I've been talking about TypeScript quite a lot and in the past 2 years. And it's also very exciting to see the massive shift that is happening now in TypeScript, because the performance of TypeScript has been a pain point in many projects for the past 2 years. So it's just a topic that I really like, and I teach and I give workshops about. So that's kind of why Liran invited me as the TS expert here.
Okay, cool. And now about you, Liran.
I'm a developer advocate for Snake, so basically doing a lot of education and security research in the Node and JavaScript space. I guess now effectively, maybe officially in the TypeScript space as well. But yeah, Ariel helped me kind of like, I think, sharpen some of these ideas and really try to frame them for TypeScript developers, since I'm not naturally, like I said, a TypeScript dev. Obviously going to adopt this more and more with the tooling and everything else. But it's been fun looking at it coming from, I think, fresh eyes to look at these problems. And I've had some which we'll talk about here, I think, but I've had like my journey into this really started with sharing something on social, and then like it got blown up as like a really long thread with like Wesley Todd from Express and stuff like that, and people lurking and asking questions afterwards. And it became clear, like very evidently clear also by doing a bunch of like social media polls, that devs view TypeScript in a very specific way, yet use it in different ways. And the whole security part is kind of meshed in between, but not in a really good way. And that's kind of like I think the premise for a lot of this discussion here.
So can you elaborate, please?
Oh yeah. So this basically started. I obviously share like a lot of security related stuff, and most of them is like snippets and kind of like say, hey, this is like there's a security issue here. Can you spot it and stuff like that? And while we're on a medium that's like not really easy to share a code snippet, I can very clearly explain it. You don't have to guess. We can talk through it together, but it's basically a function for a template engine on Node, not in TypeScript at that time. This is like 10 years old or so. But it's basically something that escape HTML characters, and the function has this type guard where it starts with like if type of some string that I'm getting equals a string, then do something and replace the characters, like basically turning them into HTML entities. So it's effectively doing a sort of output encoding like your favorite React framework would do. And then there's like there's no else, but outside of the conditional. So if it's not a string, it just exits it and it's like returns the string itself without sanitizing it or escaping it properly. And so that's the quiz basically. That's the challenge. So I was posting that picture, and someone replied like TypeScript would have caught this, and I was like immediately like, I don't think so. Like, why would it have caught this? And you know how social media and internet goes, or like, yes, it would. And I was like, no, it wouldn't. And it became like a long thread on Blue Sky. And, Wesley Todd was there and we discussed it. And I think that's kind of like the premise. Like, that's how it got me like, why would it? And I was like, actually testing, like, let's get a nice vulnerable project up and running, run TypeScript on it and see if it works. And the real premise for like what's going on there is which I think it's an interesting. I think talking through the security kind of like landscape or surface of developers using TypeScript and the actual real world vulnerabilities that come from it, also Zod related to it as a building block, is interesting. But I think what kind of like hits it on the nail, and that's something that's been uh, very resonating with both me and Wesley, was that if it seems that developers kind of like feel about TypeScript and put misplaced trust on TypeScript in the same way that they put misplaced trust on code coverage, meaning they think of it more than they should, and they think of it as a security tool. And I think that by itself is, while TypeScript is like any strongly typed language is helpful, it's not a security tool by itself, and that creates a fallacy. And that is something that I would like to change. And maybe through this conversation on this on this session, I can give you several examples of why that happens and how that fails developers.
The fact that you said that people put trust in code coverage in the context of security reminds me of that old joke about QA and engineer working for a bar and ordering one beer, ordering 0 beers, ordering 1,000,000 beers, ordering a hammer, ordering a lizard,
Ordering an array.
ordering, yeah. And then the first customer walking in asking where the toilet is, the bar blows up and kills everybody inside.
That's
Um,
the one.
yeah. So that goes to show like the value of unit testing, let's say, in the context of application security. I mean, I guess it's better than nothing, but not by much. um,
There were a lot of controversial posts about, I wouldn't mention the name, but how teams replaced a lot of unit tests because they have TypeScript now.
if
On
the
that
unit test
topic.
is there, if the unit test is there, why replace it? I mean,
Time.
I'll give you
no.
another. Let me build on another one on Ariel's take. So now we said, like, if you have TypeScript, then you maybe don't need tests. Well, how about this? I have a take where someone said we don't need Zod if we have TypeScript and stuff like that. And that's that is where this is happening. And this isn't like a random person getting pulled out of like 10,000. There's a lot of confusion. And let me pull up something. Wait, so I've pulled, and I was asking, when you work on TypeScript code base, what is your level of ecosystem depth? And I gave 3 options. One is just TypeScript and TSC, the way that, for example, maybe I would use it as like a beginner, just.
You mean for type checking, Liran?
Yes, just type checking. You just, me as like I said, I'm a beginner developer with TypeScript, easy, adapter for it. And the way that I would just like, type my, of course, have a typing system, type my data, my parameters, and run a TypeScript checker / compiler for it. So this is option 1, and like 54% of developers chose that one. The other 2 options was TypeScript and type narrowing, also known as type cards. And the third option was TypeScript and narrowing and Zod. And obviously, I think like among the other experts here on TypeScript, there's like maybe more that you could pull into the ecosystem. But I've run this poll like quite a few times, and it's always the same answer. Like at least half of the people, if not more, really just use TypeScript as the compiler and the checker, nothing beyond it.
Look, putting Zod aside for a minute, and I think that would actually be the crux of our discussion. But before we dive there, type narrowing to me is part and parcel of TypeScript. I don't see the exact difference between option number one and option number 2. Like you said, just TypeScript versus TypeScript with type narrowing. How is type narrowing not just part of TypeScript?
It means if you do runtime checks about the types.
Yeah, I understand what. Oh, you mean like specifically doing lots
Yes.
of tests using type off and
Exactly.
instance
Exactly.
off and
Yeah,
constructor equals and stuff like that.
Exactly.
And
Which is not
array.
TypeScript. Which is not TypeScript.
Yeah,
And
so-
you will do it
okay.
even if you just do pure JavaScript. But I think
Yeah,
that
now
you
I
see,
get
but
it.
that's the exact fallacy. Like developers don't they think they don't need to do this runtime security of type of, even before we go to Zod, like you said, because they use a type system, because the compiler is fine. And someone gave me a screenshot where they show me that the request, imagine like a, let's talk backend and servers and Express and TypeScript, okay? Because that's like the easiest attack surface here. So if you use that, you have a typed request, right? And the request may get like a request query filter strings and stuff like that, like maybe a filter, and maybe that is typed as a string or something like that, and then all the types that kind of like that string is flowing through the code flow to the code path in different functions. And they show me and they say, hey, you know what? I can't even write a vulnerable function because it only accepts types, and TypeScript saves it because of the compiler. And I would find it on CI. And I was like, no, it won't, because like runtime is not dev time. You can't make that assumption.
Even dev time is not dev time, and I'll touch on that in a second. But yeah, I think that's the key point that we need to explicitly make in case it's unclear to anybody who's actually listening to the podcast. TypeScript type checking is done only at build time. It has zero impact on runtime. TypeScript does not do any type checking at runtime, and that's an intentional feature of TypeScript. It's not a bug, it's a feature. That's how TypeScript is built, intentionally so. Anybody disagrees with this statement?
I like it when I give talks about TypeScript. I like to talk about the development space, and I call it the development matrix, because in runtime, which is the real world, like the types don't exist, and it's kind of because a lot of us are really, as we said, it's standard, and projects start off with TypeScript, and people that are beginner developers, they see that you can define what shape of an argument it's going to be. It is quite confusing at the beginning to make the difference that the code that you see as the developer is not the code that would run. And that confusion, that matrix is really the root of all of it. And we can even take it to many other spaces in development these days, when things are layers over layers and over layers. Beginner developers see the upper layers and not everything that composes it underneath. So I think this podcast is primarily important for any beginner developer listening that might be confused about it.
Also,
I think
to all
I
of
think
the
oh,
experienced developers who are like 50% only use TypeScript in my faults.
well, whenever anybody speaks about experience or senior developers versus junior developers, I'm reminded of the fact that every like poll about JavaScript shows that the median experience that JavaScript developer have is something like 3 years. So half the developers have less than 3 years experience. So half the developers would be considered junior, I guess, but at least half. But going back to the key point is we were talking about how Node now supports TypeScript. It supports TypeScript by type stripping. So I think that's the best way to think about it. The runtime of TypeScript is just all the types gone. That's the runtime of TypeScript. That's the JavaScript that comes out. And that's key to understanding this aspect. But going back to what you said about the safety at the time of development, even that's a bit of a fallacy. Or let's put it differently, it's a fallacy if you have any in the code, because once you've got even a single any in the code, anything that goes through that comes out of the other side without that type context, and then it might have been a string coming in, but it can be a number coming out, and that kind of propagates throughout the code. Like a single any can have a wide-ranging impact across your code base depending on where it is in the code.
Okay, hold that thought, because I was doing the exact same thing in my slides for I have like an upcoming talk on this. So I was doing the same thing, and I was like, Ariel, I need your help reviewing this, right? Our TypeScript expert. And she was like, oh, okay, you're using any here. Like a lot of beginners a lot of experienced users of TypeScript developers will see it and will tell you it's like a basic problem.
It's
Like,
a bad practice.
yeah, like don't do it. And I was like, okay, fine, let's not do it. I'll put string, and I'll use request, request body or request query that filter as string too. But that fails too. Like that will not save you either. Whatever
Oh,
you type it, that's
when you say as, you're basically telling TypeScript, trust me. You can't figure out what a type is. Then consequently, I have to tell you, and I'm telling you that it's this, and you've got to trust me on that. And maybe you're right, and maybe you're wrong. Uh, but it's kind of like sort of a it's typecasting, and typecasting is unsafe in every language that supports it, not just TypeScript.
right.
And
It's
yeah,
also inevitable, like, because the alternative would mean that you don't have a way to, when it is necessary to do tell TypeScript, what is it?
oh yeah, for sure. I'm working on, we were talking about existing code bases that are in JavaScript. I'm One of the projects that we have at work is a fairly large legacy JavaScript code base, but it's still under development, so there's value in migrating it to TypeScript, but it's going to take a long time. I was looking at a piece of code and I was kind of forced to do as unknown as X,
So I have a
which is,
question. Is that a bad thing? Like, should I not use as string, for example?
well, so here's the story. So I was trying to do something, and the only way I could get the code to compile was doing something like as unknown as string, which annoyed the heck out of me because why do I have because when I do something as unknown, it feels like I feel like dirty. So I reached out to the number one TypeScript expert that I know, which is Matt Pocock. I assume you've heard of him. And I told him, I'm doing this disgusting thing in this code snippet over here. Do you have a suggestion for, something nicer that I could do? And he said, if that what's work, just go with it.
I mean, okay, but
Because he said don't overthink it. If it's localized, if it's small, if it gets a job done, just go with it. So yeah, sometimes it exists for a reason. The language supports this idiom because it's needed.
okay, so
There are no bad practices, there's only a context.
For sure.
bad context.
Well,
I'm
and
just kidding.
the TypeScript checker does get better. Like version 4 was very, very bad at understanding JavaScript types. Version 5 is incredibly improved in understanding those. And I think that as it goes forward, I would hope that there will be a point when the idea of TypeScript would just be redundant, because if the TypeScript checker gets better and better and better at doing JavaScript, then you wouldn't need something like any, because it would just be able to introspect and look at the code, see what you returned, see, there are some idioms you have to follow. Like you can't just willy-nilly add a property onto something. You need to use object.assign if you want to add a new property that didn't exist before. But if you use object.assign, for example, whatever comes out on the other end of that, if you add something with name, age, and birthday on one side, and you do object.assign social security number, the object you get out on the other side now is correct, and it will have all 4 properties on it. So there's a lot of stuff that as time goes on, I think that the reason any exists is, I believe, just because TypeScript started out not to be a JavaScript type checker, but to be a new language, and as that gets closer and closer to how JavaScript works, yes, you'll still need to do annotations and to some degree, but I think it could get as good as Zig. Let's say that.
Yeah, but here's the thing though. I agree in the sense that basically what I understand that you mean by TypeScript understanding JavaScript types is that the static analysis mechanism has become much better. It can track the
Yes.
the type JavaScript has very dynamic and malleable types. It can track these things and figure out what's going on and basically assign the accurate type at build time based on what it figures out that the runtime will be. but there's a limit to how much you can figure out with static analysis. It's not my area of expertise. I'm not a compiler or type system expert. I think what the people at working on TypeScript have achieved is pretty remarkable, a lot more so than people give them credit for. It's much more sophisticated than the type analysis that's built into a lot of typed programming languages, or statically typed programming languages, but there's still a limit, especially given that JavaScript itself is like the poster child for dynamic types. It's like everything in JavaScript is as dynamic as it can be. So what TypeScript does, I like to the analogy that I like to use is that it's like herding cats, and there's a limit to how much the cats will respond to your instructions. Um,
Well,
exactly.
but it's kind of like JavaScript, the good parts, right? Maybe we need a JavaScript, the typed parts, because
Well,
certainly you can't use every feature of the language and have a coherent type system.
uh,
If
it's kind of happening. It's kind of happening naturally because what I'm saying is that certain JavaScript idioms that were really, fairly commonplace when people were writing in straight on JavaScript were less TypeScript friendly. And now these days, where everybody is essentially writing TypeScript, these idioms are not being used anymore. Or alternative idioms that are more TypeScript friendly are coming along and replacing them.
Which
So
idioms?
I'll give an example. In the past, you would create an object and then you would do if something, then add property X to it. If some other things, add property Y to it. And TypeScript doesn't really like that. It doesn't like the fact that you're adding a new property to something that it considered as a quote unquote kind of closed type. So people are starting to do things like they're spreading objects into the initialization just so that TypeScript can better figure out the actual properties and the actual properties that are associated with that particular type. It's kind of difficult to explain, without actually showing code. Hopefully, I've kind of made it clear. Um, but when types are modified in runtime using imperative code, it can be fairly difficult and sometimes impossible for TypeScript to properly track the type.
The way the TypeScript handles these things. By the way, the terminology for the static analysis is inferring when we talk about the types how TypeScript does the static analysis. So the terminology is inferring. But the thing about the way TypeScript handles types, it kind of takes the safe way. Okay, so let's say I have an if something happens, then add property A. And if something else happens, then add property B. So the way TypeScript would infer this thing is that this object has both A and B. Like I like to call it a Schrodinger's union. So it's both A and B. Like with only within the only way for you to narrow this down is within a certain scope to make an assumption, and that's also the reason for the pattern discriminated union, if
Yeah.
maybe you guys know. So and for the listeners that don't know what discriminated union is, so because of what I just explained, that TypeScript would take the widest type possible because in development time it can't really know what would happen. There's a pattern called discriminated union. So if I have a union of types, so let's say I have A property or B property, the way for me to help TypeScript and help it narrow it down is by adding an extra key that the key would not overlap any other keys in the union. So let's say, for example, I have property A is something, and then I would have key is true. And then the other type I'm merging into, I'm saying, or other type. So property B, and I would say that the key is false. True and false don't overlap. So I can, whenever I check this object and I would say, if key is true, within that scope, TypeScript knows the type narrowed down. TypeScript knows which type it is. And that is kind of maybe like a new idiom for
Yeah, for
handling
sure.
those things.
Yeah, so that's one example. There are several such examples. The bottom line is that I'm saying that, especially again, when I'm looking at older JavaScript code bases and I'm moving them to TypeScript, ideally it should be just about adding types. In reality, what I am saying in that is that in a lot of cases, in order to add types in a way that is actually useful or sufficient, I end up massaging the code. It doesn't stay exactly the same.
You
It,
can
it,
say the same thing about tests.
how do you mean?
That sometimes you
Oh,
might find yourself changing the code to make it testable.
yes. Although a lot of times when it happens, I'm really annoyed with it because it usually means that people are testing internal things that and then are exposing them to the outside just so that they can test them.
Or just bad dependencies.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but
So
you're
to the
absolutely correct.
point earlier of the, I already forgot how you called it,
Type cards or type
the
knowing?
union, the
Discriminating.
discriminated union.
Yeah.
So obviously this is something that people want to do. It's not something you're going to beat out of people, but metaprogramming is a code smell. There's a certain, I don't know. I guess I'm not really a fan of dynamic programming. The way that I program JavaScript is the way that I program Go. And if you need something to return a different type, then you should just have a different function. You know, if rather than have one function that handles many different cases and then have metaprogramming inside of the function, just
Yeah,
split it
but
out
I'll
into
give
separate functions.
I'll give you an example though. The common example where the canonical example almost of where you see this sort of thing is where you have a function that has a success, it returns either a success value or an error value with an explanation, and you've decided not to use exceptions. So you're actually returning an object that either has the result or has the error. So you would have a discriminating field saying that success or failure, and then based on whether it's success or failure, you would have the fields that are associated with the success in the object, or you would have the fields that are associated with the error, like the error code or the error text in that object. And you would use that discriminating field of success or failure to know what the other fields in there are.
This has already been solved though. Like we already have a tuple pattern for this, where the first element in the tuple is your success object and the second element in the tuple is your error object. So, and you can return tuples in JavaScript.
Yeah, but again, the reality is that in many cases, you first of all you're correct, and also, like I said, you could just use exceptions instead.
Yeah, and I think that's why I'd say that to me sounds like an anti-pattern. I know why people would use the tuple, especially if they're coming from Go or Rust or another language where it's common to use tuples to emulate option types or result types. But my biggest question would be, why aren't you using error handling to your best advantage?
I'll give another example though. Suppose you have a reducer and you have the action and the data that you pass in varies based on the action. So again, you would use the action field as a discriminator, and then the other field in the object depends on the action that you're doing. There are a lot of situations in which this kind of in JavaScript you would just pass an object in, and then you would effectively do runtime introspection to figure out what it contains. TypeScript tries to add static type checking on top of that. And in JavaScript, you could often make do without that discriminating field because you would just check whether a particular property exists or not, has own property, etc. TypeScript encourages you to have this kind of discriminating field that is more explicit about it.
Also, I have a question. Like the tuple has a lot of like advantages to it, but wouldn't you say that if success true like is a bit more readable than in place 0 or in index 1?
No, because if you're going to do that, you're going to do the deconstruction, right? So you're going to do let, bracket, result, comma, error, bracket, equals. So from a readability perspective, I don't know how it makes a difference, because I mean, I have not seen anybody do it without deconstructing, right? So first of all, it's not a pattern. It's not a pattern that's widely used. It's interesting. Now they've got there's something in the pipeline for this pattern. I don't remember what it's called, but in the JavaScript standards right now, there's something in the pipeline for this pattern.
Interesting.
But so that you don't have to do the square brackets, and it's like a special. I don't remember what the syntax is, but it's like a special type of await where you get the Go style / Rust style /
You can just extract the error without the whole try catch block.
Well, you can do that. You can still do that anyway, because you could just put a dot catch on there, and then you can do if type of error. But
yeah, that proposal isn't. Yeah, I know what you mean. I know that proposal.
Is it?
I think it's coloring that practice with the dot catch as not a fancy one either, which is why it's proposing that you could like do the Go style version of it.
Well, I definitely hope that it fails, because I don't think that's an idiom that we need to bring into JavaScript.
Amazing.
I think we have the problem with JavaScript is it's everything to everyone and nothing for no one.
Well, to be fair, and
it's hard to get right.
It's kind of we're digressing. We're going down a rabbit hole, but since you brought us there, so I'm in contact on X with one of with Rob Palmer. He's like the co-chair of the TC39, and he was talking about and he regularly posts about new things being added into JavaScript, and he like titles it JavaScript excitement. And so I was kind of being intentionally facetious when the last time that he did it about like the entire year, and he said like TypeScript excitement, and I said, I'm looking at your proposals and there's nothing much exciting here. And he was going like how do you mean? And I said, because these are all like library functions, like you now have this extra method on type of string, or this extra method on type of array. There's nothing like, sorry,
left pad,
exactly. There's nothing like to the similar to when you added async await, or when you added const and let, or when you added arrow functions. And he basically responded seriously by saying, yes, we are intentionally winding down the amount of syntactical changes to the language that we are making. We are at this point in time of the maturity of the language where we're really hesitant about adding new stuff into the actual syntax of the language.
And they have TypeScript now.
Yeah, but look, there are certain proposals that a lot of people are pushing for and are still stuck, maybe because of that. Stuff like the pipeline operator, which has been kind of waiting in purgatory for something like 3, 4, 5 years, because it requires a significant change to the syntax of the language. People have been talking about all sorts of pattern matching capabilities that aren't happening, again, related to actually changing the syntax of the language. But again, we really digressed. Going back to your point, Liran, about the fact that the majority of the people assumed that, not necessarily made a conscious assumption, but based on the way in which they write their code, assume that TypeScript provides them with type security, runtime type security, that it does not. And we talked about one fact, which is if you're using any in your code, and it's not such a weird pattern, because again, if you're taking an existing code base and you're moving it from JavaScript to TypeScript, it's really hard to get rid of all the any's.
Wait, but let me.
It's also what it's for, I must say. That's what the TypeScript team say any is for.
But I actually don't want to give people like a discount and say okay, if you use any, then you get it. It's not that. If you use as string, the same problem. If you use interfaces and you infer data, or like you point to data from an interface, exactly the same problem. So what I'm here to like raise the awareness of TypeScript and its policy on security. And if we just say that it's because you use any or unknown, then we fail that, because whatever you use to type it on the TypeScript side of things, if you use interfaces, I don't know, all your union stuff, branded types, whatever. Well, actually, wait, branded types has a specific
Then types.
case in which this actually does work if you can like assert it on runtime. But if you don't do that, and you still use interfaces and everything else, and you use as string and whatever, all of that fancy typing does not save you from having runtime security issues and type juggling vulnerabilities.
But does that have to do only with when you're sending information over a medium like the network, or
Mhm.
does it also just happen in the code itself? Like, what's the sort of problem associated with?
So obviously, like the easy use case here to kind of like simulate this is where you want, and this is like a general concept in application security, right? Like whatever you put as like your own data, or your trusted data, that's fine. Like I as an attacker, as an external entity to the system, maybe I can't really manipulate it and do anything with it, which is why I'm kind of like taking the example to what is the most common scenario with application development, which is you're having servers, and servers get data from somewhere, and that's usually data that flows over HTTP requests. Okay, and so that is where data comes in, and that data can come in there, but it doesn't have to come in there. For example, maybe you save usernames, file names in, I don't know, in the cloud somewhere, okay, in a very strict way, without path traversal, without anything else. But that data, you don't manage it in any other way. Like you've saved it in some way. It doesn't impact the application. But then in some other place in your application, you actually use it and trust it. But that file name was saved by you don't know it at that point, right? That imagine the developer working on that other system or other component of the system, they treat the data from the database or from like a bucket name as potentially safe, but it's not. I can give the exact example with Git branches. Do you know that you can actually have a semicolon in a Git branch name? Which, imagine now that I'm telling you, go ahead and Git clone or Git checkout to my Liran semicolon RM, percent 20, whatever, to your RF, your entire directory. You will actually, if you run this on a shell, you'll actually have shell meta character interpolated, and you will not just do a Git clone or Git checkout. You'll actually, because that branch name is valid by GitHub, will actually run a command. So this is where the typing system kind of like, it stays on the development side, and it's easiest to give you
Little
those
Bobby
examples with type
tables.
juggling.
Little Bobby tables.
Yes, in different ways and unexpected ways. Which is why I'm kind of like wanting to hit that with a hammer and say, like, TypeScript is not a security tool. Like, I appreciate it, but I don't want you, even though it gives you strongly typed security benefits, if you want to take it there, I am happy to give you that concept, but I don't want you to think of it as a security tool, because the moment you did, you'll have those mistakes done, like not understanding that it's not on runtime and all of these other issues.
So if I'm
If they make
using
fun of TypeScript for not being strongly typed, they call it a weakly typed or stringly typed. That's my favorite.
Awesome.
stringly typed, I've yet to hear
Mhm.
that.
Stringly typed, because all strings are equal. Because it's a duck type. It's not
Well,
a nominal type system.
well, I think the bigger issue though is the fact that we are kind of used from JavaScript of working with data in kind of blobs. You've got JSON, and the JSON is effectively a JavaScript object, and it can have any structure and any fields, and anything can be hung on it, and the strings can be anything, and so on and so forth. But to be fair, this is not just a TypeScript thing. I mean, the amount of times that I've written type safe C++ code and have run into situations where the bits and bytes didn't exactly match what I expected them to be. That happens.
Yes, but there's a big difference between, like, if you malloc for whatever, like 20 bytes versus 40 bytes, or you forget or not do it correctly, versus you actually interpret a string as an array or an object, because that flows through the systems and can wreak havoc. And we have like this literally has like its own vulnerability class called type juggling, which PHP developers know it because PHP, but also JavaScript developers should know it because also JavaScript.
So can you again elaborate a little bit about type juggling?
Yes. So let's go back to like our simple case. We have an Express server running with TypeScript, okay? And we only use TypeScript there. I'm not even going yet. We haven't crossed that phase of using type narrowing, which we should probably get to, and then Zod. But we haven't crossed that part. And imagine we're building something as simple as like a React, like a poor man's React server component sort of things. So imagine you're having a request coming in. You want to take the request. You want to check that, maybe call a function as well. If it's sanitized, everything is a string. The username is a string, whatever. And then that server response is basically an HTML object back to you that says, hello world or hello Ariel or whatever. And you type it all the way and you do the sanitization. But if I'm sending you now, like in the query string, I'm doing name square brackets equals, and then start an image tag, like an actual HTML image tag. Because of the way that Express is set up, what you'll actually get is an array interpreted there. And then all of your typing system within your Express and TypeScript doesn't help, because now the application itself interprets this name as an array and not as a string. And that is type juggling. That's like the pure example of, from an attacker perspective, that's called HTTP parameter pollution, because we're able to kind of like, fuzzy test, create kind of like a mutation testing sort of on the request itself. But to the application itself, it is actually being juggled from one type to a different one. And that's a very classic one that happens a lot of times.
So basically, just to clarify, you were using TypeScript typecasting, which is the as keyword, to tell TypeScript, trust me, this is a string, because you assumed that it's a string.
Yes.
But in reality, in runtime, it was actually an array rather than a string.
Mm-hmm.
So you were telling TypeScript, this is a string, but it actually turned out to be an array. And then from that point on, flowing throughout your entire code base, it's treating, the assumption is that it's a string, but it isn't.
Correct. And now imagine that your sanitize function to this controller, whatever you want.
And again, one more thing, and of course, TypeScript does JavaScript does automatic type conversions, so that when you actually try to use it as a string, it will be transformed into a string. But if you do certain sanitation functions, it will only sanitize the first part rather than the entire thing, maybe.
Yeah, I guess it depends how you sanitize it. Yeah, you don't have to cast it. That's where I'm at. So imagine that sanitize function, again, have the function signature says as string and everything. So TypeScript goes fine. But now that array flows through the system function as an array. But when it hits something like, your disallow list, or the name, the data itself, dot includes, and then you give it that input, that actually will get coerced from with a toString function from an array to a string, and you'll get the first element, because that's just how it works. And you don't know this ahead of time. And worse than that, if you type check the system, everything will match just fine, and your unit test will work just fine, because it's typed throughout the system as a string. And I want to also correct that, because it doesn't matter that you lie to TypeScript and tell it as a string, because if you define an interface, or you rely on the query parameters of the interfaces as exported by Express or any other framework, that will also not save you, because you will get to the exact same problem we're talking about runtime.
Let me maybe help sharpen this up a bit. In Express, for example, so the data that you accept from a request, you don't have to like cast it. That cast is known as like a bad practice, where you tell it as string. Like if you just type the argument of the function, like request, Express's request type is a generic type. So you can be like request should accept a user of some interface like You don't even see the bad practice here. It's just like you're actually doing a good practice. You type the argument of your function, but on this entry point of the application where you just accept the request, for TypeScript it's any, and that's where TypeScript expects you to type it. But this is where like it gets confusing, because you think you're going on best practice because you typed your argument, but on the other hand, typing a request without actually doing some runtime validation is a bad practice, and it's not very common.
So
I do actually want to cross that chasm. Like let's cross and say, let's go to like that phase and say, if the runtime type checking is the type narrowing, okay, or the what's also known as like the type guards, the if type of, like, what do you think of that? Because I have my own opinions, but what do you think of that?
Well, first of all, there are a couple of issues with that. First of all, it's unfortunate. First, it's kind of bad practice in JavaScript. Again, putting TypeScript aside, in JavaScript, I always considered it kind of bad practice to have to write this type of code, because the whole concept of JavaScript was about duck typing, about how something behaves rather than exactly what it is. So creating these kind of switch statements or if else based on the type of a thing, basically kind of indicated that it was. I kind of thought of it as a code smell. But that being said, stuff coming in over the wire cannot be trusted. So there are certain points on the edges of the system where I feel that these type of type guards are a must. Within the application itself, I would strive to avoid the need for them as much as I possibly can in terms of just the way that I write the code.
I resonate with that, and I'll just add another clarification here, because I see how some security aspects are kind of like creeping in here and there. Like, you're very concerned about something that's on the wire. And I want to give you an example of a system. Imagine you're building the web API for things, and you're typing everything, and it goes through the schema, and everything is perfect. Not cynically, it is perfect. And you're saving something and you're putting that data into a message bus. Okay, it's going into a queue, and some other system gets it. And that system could say something that got into the queue is our internal system. That username or that email or something, that file name, is a trusted data because it's not over the wire. I'm actually getting it from like my own RabbitMQ or whatever. And that is exactly where things fall apart, because that if you're not using any actual security controls and measures on that end as well, and you having that concept of it's not over HTTP, it's not over API, no one is sending this is not user input, I'm literally taking it off of the file system, off of the message queue, off of something that I presume as trusted because it's our, I don't know, internal thing, it's an internal service. That is where things also break apart.
Why?
Same thing, because that data flowed in, my file name flowed into the system, and you could have typed it and said, okay, it's supposed to be a string, and you saved it as like an image that you will manipulate later, and fine, like there's no SQL injection when you save the file name, whatever. You put it in the database. You also created a queue you started the queue with the event over there. Then that system gets it and does something with it. Imagine that's like a worker, an async worker, offline worker that takes that data, and now it needs to do something with your image, like manipulate it, like resize it or whatever. So maybe it goes off and does something like an OS command to run something like ImageMagick or something like that to convert it. Then it takes that file name and puts it on disk. And the moment it did that, it trusted the system. What if my file name is literally called liran.jpg rm-rf? Exact same problem.
So
it's still a string, but it's now in a different context abusing you.
So I want to verify that I understand what you're saying. What you're saying is anytime anytime I put data outside the direct control of my own code, to an extent, my ability to trust that data goes away. Because if some other part of the system gets compromised, now I'm vulnerable to that compromise.
There's just like a lot in play here. Like, this isn't type juggling. I was just like specifically like going with a needle on what you said, where like you were like very concerned and conscious on the transport, like the HTTP
Yeah,
layer.
but from
And I'm
my
saying it's more than that. So I mean, the way to probably have done it better is you have like proper security controls and secure coding. So the way that you would do an OS command, like an operating system command, we just need to be in a more secure way. And then whatever the data is, it wouldn't impact you. So there's like a bunch of things in play here. What you said is not incorrect. It's just like there's a complete answer. There's more than just one thing that needs to go, and that's related also to a lot of concept in security, like defense in depth. You have to like have several layers of defense and security controls and security measures. And for example, a lot of people think, hey, let's just sanitize all the data. Well, that's not how real world works. You don't really have to sanitize all the data. For example, when you put user input as like an image, a very bad like HTML image tag, and you give it to React, it doesn't sanitize the data for you. It does something else that's called output encoding. It converts the data into HTML entities. That's a whole different concept from sanitizing the data. The data remains the same, but the way that it gets interpreted on the DOM, the way it's written to it, changes. It's not sanitization because the source of the data remains the same.
I do want to move on because we're starting to run out of time. I do want to touch on the type guard and
Zod.
on
Let's
Zod.
talk Zod. Let's talk about Zod. Okay, I have nothing else on type guards. Like this is, I was curious about your opinion. I, by the way, resonate the same. I love the duct taping, but I just feel that's like it's really hard to maintain a lot of type of, and I kind of like agree with that.
And by the way, type off is not enough because type off is like a very rough
Of
tool.
null
It's like
is
it's a
object.
sledgehammer. You need instance off as well. And from what I know, like half the JavaScript developers at least don't really understand how instance off actually works. But putting that aside, that's a different discussion. Let's talk about Zod.
Amazing.
Ooh.
Let's talk about Zod.
It's one of my faves, and I talk about it quite often. So
Go for
for
it.
the listeners that don't know Zod, Zod is a very cool way to kind of bridge between the development time and the runtime. So it's kind of a bridge between TypeScript and JavaScript. So it's basically a schema validation library that is what's called TypeScript first. So the idea is that you define a runtime schema. So you're defining a schema that would check the object in runtime. And Zod exposes a method called infer, which allows you to create a type out of your runtime validation. So basically, you kind of have a single source of truth. You primarily define your runtime validation, and you also get the type inferred out of it. The reason why Zod is called TypeScript first, it's kind of because it's kind of leading in the industry in terms of handling more complex types. So beyond the basic JSON, Zod is very good at inferring union types and etc.
For
And
those who are not familiar with Zod, but are maybe familiar with React, Zod, in a certain extent, is kind of reminiscent of the prop types that we used to have in React, that also did runtime type validation when you were running in development mode. So it's not exactly the same, but there were a lot of similarities in the way in which it's kind of written.
you mean that it inferred the TypeScript from the runtime?
No, not that. I'm talking about how you literally write the Zod
Kind of like a
runtime
schema.
schema.
Yeah.
You
Okay,
kind of
the
used
schema
to do
type.
you used to do the same. You have this
Mhm.
kind of schema definition language that gets executed at runtime, and you kind of had a similar thing with the now deprecated React prop types that you used to put on React class components in order to specify. Before we had TypeScript, we used to use that to specify the types, and it would actually get checked at runtime rather than at build time, because there was necessarily an actual build time to test it in. But it would only be tested and in development mode, not in
So what's the issue
production.
with Zod? You're wondering.
No, first of all, I hope everybody is clear. AJ, Steve, was Ariel's explanation. It seemed to me it was an excellent explanation, but I was wondering if you have any questions about that. Okay.
It was excellent.
So basically, what it means though is that by adding in Zod, we can do runtime type checking. We can say that what I'm getting over the wire is supposed to have this exact structure. It gets checked at runtime. If it passes, then great. If it fails, we get an exception. Excellent.
You
Well,
can handle it. You can choose whether you
Yeah.
raise an exception or
I love that you use the structure because it's a good segue.
yeah. So given that, problem solved, no?
Yeah, almost.
yes and no.
Yeah, kinda. It depends which problems are solved. So here's the thing. Now let's forget TypeScript aside. You do use. Imagine you're using something like your use case being like there's a notification system, and you have to update a bunch of stuff related to like a notification system. So there's like notification type and modes, and the value of it and whatever, like an email daily, and is it disabled or enabled? There's like a bunch of stuff. That's an object that flows into the system. Your API on this server side uses Zod. It says, okay, my notification schema is an object that is made up of notification type, which is supposed to be, like you said, Dan, a structure of a string. So that's fine. That's a string, and the mode is string, and everything else is maybe a string or a Boolean. It depends. So far, so good. And if I try to send you something like to try to like do type juggling and send you an array in the notification type, so it's not just email as a string, but I don't know, email and something else as an array, it will get rejected. And you think you've kind of like solved the problem, except there are more sort of vulnerabilities that can flow in. Indeed, not directly related to Zod, but just that using Zod is potentially a fallacy that wouldn't save you from it. So my use case for that is, imagine that now I'm sending in a string, but that string for notification type is underscore underscore proto underscore underscore. I won't do the whole underscore again, but just know that when I say proto, that's what I mean. And my notification mode is going to be a string also, but it's now as admin. And my notification mode value is going to be true. Okay, so I'm giving you all of those strings. Zod has no issues, and it works towards your defined schema of all of them have to be strings. So it flows in. But if all of them, I see you have a question there. No? Okay. So if all of them flow into the app itself, and the application does something, one of two things with the data incorrectly in an insecure manner, then you now have a prototype pollution vulnerability.
Basically, if you're using that field as a key on an object, and you're now accessing that object's prototype instead of one of the fields on the object.
Correct. That is one. So you could insecurely use it directly with what is not a literal string, but actually
and you know what the lesson is. Don't use JavaScript object as dictionaries. Use a map instead.
There we go. But there's another way where it can bite you, which is if you don't do that, but instead you do something like, let's say you work with a nested data structure. Imagine like address, and then there's like a business address and office address, and maybe there's like nested data structures there. And sometimes what people do is recursive JSON parse the data and set it like that. If you do, so actually that is the canonical example of prototype pollution vulnerabilities. So many libraries like Lodash, like ObjectPath, like so many others that's been used, like prototype pollution has been found to be impacting many kind of vulnerability of libraries in different ways. But they all basically do the exact same insecure issue, which is an insecure way of doing a recursive JSON merge. And if you do that and you're not aware of prototype pollution, then that can crawl in. And then again, using Zod doesn't help you unless you do something else, which is using string literals in Zod. But that's not always possible. Not always the data is hardly typed in advance, like type email or type digest. Maybe your user data is username or an address or something like that. And you can't confine it to a literal schema.
You can regex it.
Regex.
Oh my God, we did not open that door. That's a different topic.
Now, the fact that TypeScript can you in certain situations, like everybody goes to eval, but eval is like the extreme situation. But the fact that even without eval, TypeScript can sometimes consider strings as code can introduce certain vulnerabilities because just looking at the type of the thing is not sufficient, is what you're saying, if I understand correctly.
Correct. It's not. I mean, yeah, it's not sufficient because this vulnerability can impact you. And there's another actually issue with Zod. So I don't know if you knew this, but another one that's related to a mass assignment vulnerability that would happen with Zod is if you define a schema, and let's say my schema is like my name and my email, and that's what you define, and that's what I send in, and you do like Zod, schema, safe parse, and all of this thing, and it doesn't throw, it's all success, blah blah blah. You push it down the wire to your services and repository pattern, and you normally do like user.save, and that user data comes from the request because you already validated it with the schema, and so that gets persisted on the database. That's a very common pattern also with ORMs. But if I send another string with the data in the schema, like is admin or role equals admin, that will also satisfy Zod because by default, it doesn't have any issue with data that is not on the schema. So if I add 50 fields and your schema has 2 fields, your schema parsing will still say that it's valid schema. Okay, and that's the ending
because
of
JavaScript objects are open by default.
Because you haven't used, I mean, the correct pattern would be to create a new object, or like you said, like map it to a new object that takes fields one by one that you trust. But if you just take, user equals request body user, you say, I validated it, it's fine. But then you pass that user from the request, which comes from the user input, and pass it all around. You have, again, that fallacy as if that schema was checking it and it's valid. But
Or
it's
you
not.
can you can strict parse it.
Yeah, doesn't Zod has the ability to say only these fields and no more?
I think it does. It's called strict mode. It's strict parsing, and by default, when Zod just started, it was actually the other way around. So the default was to strict parse, and obviously it's not that comfortable for many use cases. So they changed the default behavior. But I think that Liran, like what we really want to bring out here for the listeners is that even if you're using Zod, try to consider, understand that if you're not strict parsing, it could be larger, and that there is the ability to strict parse it, and we need to wisely choose it when it's needed.
Exactly.
somebody
It's just
does-
not the default. And when you don't have secure defaults, you're going to have adopters who use the system by the README or whatever in an insecure way by default. That's not what you want to do.
And then somebody does JSON stringify or toString or whatever, and they get something that's different than what they expected.
Correct.
Understood. We're starting to run really short on time. Is there anything else especially that we want to touch on that we haven't talked about so far?
We're going to do regex next time, right, Ariel?
I would love to have you on again to talk about regex, everybody's favorite topic.
Recently, I've been developing only parsers. So I've evolved. Like I started off my experience as a COBOL developer in the army, and then I moved to web development, so React, and now I'm doing backend, so it's Python, and now that's it. I'm a regex developer. Like the next level is pure energy.
You're top of the pyramid right now.
Looking down at all of you lots.
You're actually one of my picks will have to do with parsing, but we'll get there. So before we finish and we go to picks, if anybody wants to get in touch with you, what would be the best way, especially you, Ariel, as you have like no presence on the interwebs?
I have LinkedIn.
Oh yeah, everybody's favorite social network. The social
That's
network
how
where
they
fun
can't
goes to
harass me.
die.
I'm protecting my soul for now, so no X yet. But you can reach me on LinkedIn, and I'm very polite, and I will answer you all.
So it's Ariel Schulman on LinkedIn?
Yes.
Are you the only Ariel Schulman on LinkedIn?
I'm the. How many girls are there with the profile picture of them on a stage called Ariel Schulman on LinkedIn? Let's research this thing.
Okay. Cool, cool. That's another thing about both of you, that your conference speakers, and that also goes to one of the picks that I'll have today. But anyway, and how about you, Liran? If anybody wants to contact you, what's the best way?
For people outside of Israel, you can just Google Lirantal and you'll find me on X or whatever. Inside Israel, there's a famous, famous Israeli singer called Lirantal. That's not me. It's a very, it's a very crude style here. So I don't know. I won't open more than that.
Cool, cool. Okay, let's move on to picks then. AJ, do you want to start us off with picks?
So I went through the Proxmox advanced training with Wihui, which is the Canadian company that does the training. And not that I regularly do trainings, but it was the best training experience that I've ever had. Everything, if you've ever done a workshop, you know the first part of the workshop, because this training had both educational material and labs and whatnot, but like everything just worked. There was nothing that didn't work except for things that were common user error that were part of what was going to be covered in the material anyway. And I just thought that was really, really great. So I am myself working on some Proxmox material, which is why I took the training primarily to become Proxmox certified, but also because I wanted to learn, and I wanted material that I create to match the same quality that you get from the official training. And hopefully even I'd like to be on the path to become an official trainer with Proxmox. But anyway, if you want to have the official Proxmox training, the Wihui is probably a better bet from some of the things I came to understand than even getting it from Proxmox themselves, just in terms of the way that Wihui's business works and how that drove them to create the course content, because there's a lot of leeway in how to present it. So anyway, and for people that don't know, Proxmox it's for co-location or for on-prem. So if you want to save a ton of money, then you can use Proxmox and have as many nines as you want uptime without having a cloud bill that costs you the same amount per month that it would cost to buy the servers outright. And that's all I got. That's my thing.
Steve,
Great.
I wonder what you want to talk to us about today in your picks.
Let's see. Well, suppose we could try something new like dad jokes.
I love the one about the half brother, by the way, the one that you posted.
Yeah, that was good. For those who aren't familiar with the one, it's a very short conversation between myself and a friend, and I said, "Oh, I have a half brother," and he says, "A different mother?" I said, "No, shark attacks." But no, I'll do some new ones this week. So, question: why shouldn't a dentist marry a manicurist? Because they'll fight tooth and nail. Right.
Well deserved. Well deserved drums.
What do you call cheese that isn't yours? Nacho cheese.
I knew that one.
Yes. Well, you should have jumped in and answered it. I would have taken an answer.
I was on mute.
Oh, okay. And then finally, this is just more of an observation that Bigfoot is sometimes confused with Sasquatch, yet he never complains. Yeti, Y-E-T-I, Yeti. Anyway, those are the jokes of the week.
You can tell the jokes worked because I was like grasping my head, you know?
It's more like, it's usually the moan and, oh my God, I can't believe he said that.
Dad!
Yes. Yes. And when I said it, sometimes I'll try to work those in as real stories. And my family's gotten wise to it after so many years. The first thing out of the mouth, Dad, is this a joke or are you serious? Just listen, okay? Anyway.
Okay, so now it's my turn. I've not been on the show for a while. I've had various things, actually a lot of them fun things, but they've kept me away from the podcast recording. So I've got a bunch of picks that have accumulated. I'm hoping I'm making the right choice of using them all now and not saving some for next week, but we'll see. So anyway, one thing is I was doing this thing. It was really fun. You reminded me when you were talking about parsing. Um, we had a certain idiom in, again, going back to existing legacy code. We had a certain idiom in the code which was bad performance wise, and I wanted to fix it, and it was really just, a very localized rewriting of the code. Now initially I thought about using some sort of regular expression and doing a global search and replace across the entire project, but that kind of turned out to be a bit messy, and
Did you end up using code mods?
kind of what I did, but I'll get to that. The other thing was that I was worried that it fixes the situation as it currently is, but there's nothing preventing anybody from using the same poor idiom in the future. So I wanted to safeguard against that as well. So what I came up with in the end was a custom ESLint rule with a fixer. And so I actually had built an ESLint rule that analyzed the AST, identified that kind of localized bad idiom, and then had the fixer which actually fixed it to the correct code. And then I basically told ESLint to fix that thing across the entire project, and which fixed all existing occurrences. But now I also had it as a custom rule going forward. So if anybody ever uses that bad idiom in the future, they will get a red squiggly, and they can even, right click and request a fix, and it will automatically fix that code for them. So it's a safeguard. It both fixed the existing problem and is a safeguard for the future. And it was a lot of fun to write, and I really enjoyed it. So that was point number one. Point number two, um, there's last year I actually did not participate in any conference, which was really depressing in a way because I'm kind of an extrovert and I like speaking at conferences. But this year I'm already speaking at three, so I'm really happy about that.
Woo,
Yay!
nice.
So
Yeah,
I'll be speaking at the JS Heroes conference
love
in
it.
Cluj in Romania.
Romania, yeah.
Yeah, it's I think they've still got tickets. So if you're in Europe and you want to attend a really top-notch JavaScript conference, and it's top-notch despite the fact that I'm speaking there, it's because it's got some amazing speakers on the list. I highly recommend attending. And Cluj is a lovely city, although I've not been, but I've been told. I've been to other parts of Romania; they're also lovely. But I've been told that Cluj is lovely as well. I'm looking forward to it. So that's conference number one. And then in Tel Aviv, I'll be speaking both at React Next and at NoTLV, back to back, day after day.
Nice.
Yeah,
Sharing the stage with us too.
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Both of you are speaking at both conferences, just
No,
one or the
no,
other?
No,
I'm not
this
doing
year
React.
last year I did. Never again. Good luck, Da.
Just so
Never
you know,
again.
just so you know,
Suffer is coming.
just so you know that like a couple of years back, I gave two talks at the same conference back to back.
I
But
wasn't
then
one
you
of
get it
them.
over with. Isn't it
Yeah,
better?
that's true. That's true. That's easier.
Yeah, kind of. But I spoke in one room, finished, wrapped up, went to another room, gave another talk there.
Changed outfit.
Yeah, no. Anyway, and the other pick that I wanted, my final pick, is a really funny story. Did you hear that one about the new interview coder story?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the
That's
one
so
who.
funny.
Yeah, yeah.
So
The
yeah,
one who
so
gamified it.
yeah, so basically these two, well, ex-Columbia students, um, they were like in the end, what's it called? They were like in they had the entrepreneur mindset, and they were looking for an application to develop. So what they created is an application that allows you to cheat on lead code interviews. It basically, per my understanding, I've not ever tested it. I'm not interviewing. But anyway, what it does, I understand that it does, is it creates an invisible, it's a local desktop application that you install. It creates this kind of invisible window that you can
It's
see,
genius.
but it's not reflected through Zoom or
Zoom
whatever
or
you're
yeah.
using. And it shows you answers using AI, and it shows you though in a sort of progressive way. So you kind of, it seems like you're thinking about the answer and coming up with the answer as it goes along. And it also moves the window around so that your eyes aren't always focused on the same point in the screen. And it does all sorts of magic. And then they use that program to interview for basically all the fan companies and got offers from all of them. And then they, after they got the offers, they advertised the story and showed the images of all the offers that they got. And apparently somebody from Amazon got really, really upset about it, contacted Columbia and had them expelled. But I think they're probably
Amazing. Let's hire them now.
I think they're
Are they
probably
looking for jobs?
yeah, I think they're probably good for jobs now.
Sounds like overqualified, I would even say.
Yeah, that's there was something else like this that came out a couple of years ago. There was a United States state government website that put something, I mean, it was ridiculous, like social security numbers were rendered into the HTML for, it's like they were rendering out their entire database into the HTML. So when you did a search, it was doing it that way. It was something just absolutely ridiculously stupid. And then when the person points it out, then they you know, trump up these charges of cybercrime and hacking. It's, come on, you know, he right-clicked inspect. So I think that sounds so overblown from the perspective that they're just pointing out a flaw in the system. You know, I don't know whether or not they actually helped
Well,
In
people to get fake
Israel, we call
jobs.
it the hacking tool colon browser.
yeah, that's uh, who likes to use that term a lot?
Barzik, of course.
Barzik, like to, yeah, that incredible tool, the view source in the browser, that incredible hacking tool. By the way, there's the old story about the person who decoded the code for DVD encoding, I think it was, and then some young guy from Norway or Iceland or somewhere, and they tried to hit him with a DMCA violation or something. So he basically, the way that he got around it was that he printed the code on T-shirts.
Amazing.
Yeah. Anyway,
Amazing.
by the way, talking about T-shirts, you might have noticed when I got up that I'm actually wearing the T-shirt for a different podcast. It's the shirt that I got when I was a guest
Ah,
on JS
yes,
Party,
party.
and the reason that I'm wearing it is because that unfortunately JS Party's ended. Now you might think that podcasts compete with each other. No, I think it's certainly a case of rising tide lifts all ship. I'm really saddened whenever something like whenever a podcast just stops. I know that Changelog now has like general podcasts, but the fact that they had a dedicated JavaScript podcast was great. I enjoyed listening to it. As I said, I was a guest on it. I'm saddened that it ended, and I'm happy that we're continuing. So, you know, if you're looking for your JavaScript fix, then stay with us. And those would be my picks. Ariel, Liran, who wants to go first?
Liran goes first. I didn't think of pics.
I will
Well,
go. I have a
you
few,
don't
but
have
I'll.
to. You don't have to give picks. It's a nice to
You can
have.
share
It's not a
mine,
must to have.
Ariel.
I'm, I'm not
Um,
ruining my reputation then.
I'll go quick on them though. TV shows, I'll go for Arcane and Blue Eye Samurai, which are masterpieces. You have to watch them if you're into, and if you even if you're not into like anime and stuff like that, they're like amazing.
They're not exactly anime though.
Not exactly anime though, but it's also not like live action stuff. So I highly recommend watching them. Arcane specifically has an incredible soundtrack, which is very emotional.
It's
Book
about a
wise,
video game, no?
it's yeah, video game. Book wise, I'll go with Sandworm by Andy Green. If you like the kind of like how security kind of like started. All the things like Russian hacking groups and stuff like that. Everything that started in Ukraine like over a decade ago. It's super cool. It goes and analyzes like why in the politics and how security researchers go at it, incidents and stuff like that. Podcast go with Star Talk. I love like space and astronomy and stuff like that, and it has Neil deGrasse Tyson, and it's like a super fun space and time and everything around this physics stuff is super fun to watch. Events, sorry, to listen. If you go to events and you like that, I'm actually going to recommend everyone here who are developers to go to DEF CON, which is super weird hacker kind of like underground punk style hacking conference in Vegas in the summer in August. You'll get definitely a good taste of what the culture is like.
Won't you also get hacked while you're there?
So for a long time, actually, that was a thing where you would be recommended to go without any mobile devices or mobile devices turned off. Never connect to any Wi-Fi, whatever you think that is. Mobile devices off, Bluetooth off, everything off.
Wow.
But it had that reputation for a long time, since definitely since like the early days, like 90s and stuff like that. But it's far more mature now. Like it's people like don't do those things anymore. And I mean, if you do care about your privacy and devices, anyway, don't go there with your phone and laptop and just work off. Those are my picks.
Great. Ariel,
Can I
have
be
you
like
been
all
able-
of the above?
No problem. Just having you here is good enough.
Yay.
Okay then, everybody, thank you for participating on our show. Steve had to drop off, but we are still here, and hopefully so are you. So thank you all. Thank you, Ariel. Thank you, Liran, and see you all next time. Bye.
Thank you for having us.
Definitely.
And Ariel dropped off. Hopefully she finished uploading. Wait a
Yeah.
minute. I want to
I see
stop
it
the
on a-
recording. Oh, here it is. Stop.
99% uploading. Let's see how it goes.
If she, let me see.